Yamiche, the Democrats in the House have already impeached President Trump. What's their next move?
Well, it's a tough position that John Bolton has put Democrats in, because he's now offering up more information and really talking about behavior that Democrats might see as impeachable, but they've already impeached President Trump, so they can't really do it a second time. What we do know is that this is a 500-page bombshell. What John Bolton is saying is that President Trump not only is naive and doesn't understand global affairs, but he's also saying that he's intentionally using the office of the presidency to offer favors and to try to curry favors from international leaders, including authoritarian leaders and in some regards dictators. So John Bolton is essentially saying that the Democrats didn't go far enough in the impeachment inquiry, but he did not want to testify. And he says that if subpoenaed, he might have shown up for the impeachment inquiries, but we saw government officials time and time again go up to the Hill to testify. They didn't have to be subpoenaed. So I think John Bolton has put himself in a position where Republicans are looking at him and saying he's either a liar or he's spreading classified information. And then on the Democratic side, they're saying, well, really, he just wanted to make a lot of money with a book and didn't want to actually help prosecute this president.
Geoff, can the White House stop the publication of this book on Tuesday?
Apparently, they can try, but a judge who was looking at the case said, he used the phrase, the horse is already out of the barn. I mean, the book has been distributed, some 200,000 copies domestically, another 1,000 abroad. And to Yamiche's point, when elements of the book hit the press earlier this week, it was viewed through a partisan lens, almost like everything else is these days. So you had Republicans accuse him of being an opportunist and a sensationalist, and Democrats said he was unpatriotic for withholding all of these allegations for the publication of a book when he chose not to testify during the impeachment hearing. Which strikes me as particularly damning about the John Bolton allegations is that if you look at them in the total of what these retired four-star military generals have said just a couple of weeks ago, to include the former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, they're all essentially saying the same thing. In their view, President Trump is ethically unfit and intellectually unprepared for the job. And that is damning. And there's really nothing the White House can say to undo that.
That's such a great point, Geoff, about this is one of many tell-all books that's come out about President Trump. And Susan, I'm going to be interviewing John Bolton for Washington Post Live on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. But like usual, Susan, you got ahead of me. I know you've interviewed Bolton already for USA Today. That's embargoed. I know it's a little sensitive. We can't get into all the details of your big interview. But tell me about the significance of this book coming out. I know we've seen all these books before from former officials, but why does Bolton matter, if at all?
There's a cottage industry of books for and against Donald Trump. I think this one is different. It's the highest ranking official to be writing a book about the president. It's someone who was in the room, not relying on sources to tell him what was happening. He's a guy who takes notes. I mean, this has been the characteristic of John Bolton at the UN and other jobs he's had. Takes a yellow legal pad into every meeting, writes copious notes, writes down what other people say. That provided the basis for his book. One more thing, he has impeccable Republican credentials, and I think that makes it harder for the president and his allies to simply dismiss the book as sour grapes.
And Josh, I was so intrigued by your story, one of the first up about the book. You, of course, were hustling, making sure you got a copy before anybody else. And you focused, Josh, in your story on the China part of the book. And what's the power of what Bolton's saying on China, that the president's trying to ingratiate himself with Xi Jinping, that he's perhaps soft on China, Bolton alleges. Could that be a campaign issue now for Vice President Biden to jump on?
Well, you already see Vice President Biden's campaign jumping on that. I mean, what Bolton alleges in the book is that in meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping, that the president says, I want you to buy more agricultural products, in Bolton's word, in a plea to help him win re-election. That account has been disputed, obviously, by some other Trump officials, but Bolton was, around for those meetings, as others have pointed out. And what the Biden campaign is likely to say, Bob, job is, this president's been attacking Joe Biden on being too weak on China. But when he has the chance to confront Xi Jinping, he says, I'm okay with the concentration camps, according to Bolton's book. He says, I just want you to help me win re-election, according to Bolton's book. The book also says that he tells the Chinese president, there's a clamoring back home for me to change the constitution so I can serve more than 2 terms. I mean, some of the more illuminating and disturbing scenes, if you believe John Bolton in the book, relate to the president's relationships with the Chinese.
Speaking of Biden, Yamiche, what do you make of Senator Klobuchar of Minnesota pulling herself out of consideration to be Biden's running mate?
Based on the sources that I've talked to, Amy Klobuchar saying that she doesn't want to be Joe Biden's VP is much like any other person on Capitol Hill saying, no, that's okay, I don't want to be president. The idea is that Amy Klobuchar wasn't really in the running at this point anymore, and that she was really wanting to make a statement that made her in some ways look gracious and made her look like she was very much interested in the idea of diversity, which I'm not saying that she isn't, but just according to my sources, it makes it seem as though Amy Klobuchar was trying to find a way to say, look, I know I'm out of the running and here's what my answer is to who should possibly fill this role. I think Joe Biden, frankly, is going to have to answer questions if he picks a woman who isn't of color, especially in this moment of protest, especially in this moment of reckoning on race, and especially because the Democratic Party, time and time again, goes to African Americans, especially African American women, who are at this point the most loyal part of the Democratic base, and says, give me your vote, and then they don't actually look like the people they're asking their votes for. So I think in some ways, whoever Joe Biden picks, if it's not a woman of color, he's going to have to answer, why didn't you pick somebody of color?